A good Sunday to you all. So I've never actually done a Q&A video before, and I'm thinking about doing one here in a couple weeks now. So if that is something that would be of interest to you, if you could just submit a question down below, that would be great. Thanks. I am super excited for this week's video. I've always wanted to do a Q&A video, but honestly I was afraid to put it out there that I was actually going to do a Q&A video and ask for the questions because I was concerned that I wouldn't receive enough questions to actually make the video. And then when I don't make the video, everybody would know why I didn't make the video because I didn't get enough questions for the video. And I just built this entire thing up in my head, but I am happy to say that I did get enough questions for this video. And I narrowed it down to about 30 different questions. Many of them were very similar, so I just kind of consolidated them into one. So in order just to make as efficient use of our time, I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into it. So the first question is, do you prefer autofocus or manual focus? It's a little bit of both, honestly. I don't have the best eyes, so I usually rely on autofocus to go ahead and set my focus point. And then once I have that locked in, I usually will shift my lens into manual mode just to go ahead and lock that focus. The only time I don't rely at all on autofocus is if I'm doing any kind of astro work, and then I usually just manually focus on the brightest star until the star looks the smallest in my viewfinder. Usually stars that are out of focus look much larger, and then as the focus becomes a little bit tighter on the star, they get smaller and smaller. So if you just make the star as small as possible, that's usually when it's in focus. But yeah, short answer, a little bit of both. The next question, how long have you been doing YouTube videos and are you happy you started them? So I think I started my channel in 2016, but I didn't really get consistent with the videos I was putting out there until July of August of last year of 2018. So maybe almost a year and a half now. And yes, I'm very happy I started it. I absolutely love creating YouTube videos and the interaction with you all is something that is very unique to YouTube. I don't really see that across Instagram or Facebook or any of the other social platforms as it is with YouTube. Best telephoto lens for Sony E-mount. I'm gonna have to go with the 100 to 400 GM. I've also had the 70 to 200 f4, which is also a great lens, but I absolutely love the 100 to 400 G Master. Do you ever shoot in JPEG? No, never shoot in JPEG. How do you decide when to shoot wide or get in close on a landscape image? That's a great question. Could be a topic for an entire video, but I usually just take into account the surrounding area to my subject. If there's a lot of interest around my subject, I will usually shoot a little bit wider. And if there isn't really anything interesting around the subject, or if there's a lot of distractions, that's usually when I want to get in a little bit tighter, just to try and create as focused and as simplified of a composition as possible. What inspires you most? Ocean, mountains, forest, or deserts? So definitely mountains number one, probably followed by forest, oceans, and then deserts in last place. And the only reason I have deserts in last place is because I honestly haven't done a lot of shooting in deserts, so I really don't know what I'm missing. What do you recommend in Lightroom to draw attention to the subject? Vignette versus grad versus the adjustment brush. Once again, another great question. It could be an entire video in itself. But one thing all three of those approaches have in common is they darken down areas that are not interesting in order to focus the viewer's attention on areas of interest. I think all three of them are absolutely fantastic, but if you want to get really refined and really focused, you can use the adjustment brush within Lightroom as a means to dodge and burn your photograph, and I think that's probably the best overall way to direct the viewer's attention. Do you ever leave the house without a ball cap on? Yes. Yes, I do. Any plans to come to California or Alaska anytime soon? So I'm usually in California at least a couple times a year for various reasons, and I've never actually been to Alaska, but it is definitely on my bucket list, and it's a place I certainly want to get to as soon as possible. Is the Sony a7R II still a good choice for astro and landscapes in 2020? I sure hope so, because I plan on continuing to use my R2 into 2020. I don't have any issues with it outside of substandard weather sealing and substandard battery life. I think the R3 and the R4 are definitely better than the R2 in those departments, but I think the overall image quality of the R2 is absolutely fantastic. When and why did you get into landscape photography? So I think it was about 6 or 7 years ago when I first started to pay attention to that genre of photography. But I think if you ask a lot of landscape photographers what got them into landscape photography, the common answer is really their love for the great outdoors, which I think is a fantastic answer. But unfortunately for me, it was really the opposite. Landscape photography is what made me love being outside even more. So But I think that the pace of landscape photography is something I really enjoy. I find it to be very slow, very relaxing, almost kind of a meditative activity to go through. But I love the overall process of landscape photography. I love planning the trips, I love executing it, and I love the downtime while you're on location when you're waiting for the conditions to improve, or you're waiting for the right light or the right weather or whatever the case may be. I love that downtime. It really gives me an opportunity to kind of slow down, slow my mind down, and really relax. Variable NDs, yes or no? Yes, absolutely. How do you like North Carolina? I might move there soon. I love North Carolina. It's one of the very few states on the eastern seaboard of the U.S. that has a coast and a coast and mountain range. So I live smack dab in the center of North Carolina. So I live about 2 hours from the ocean and about 3 hours from the mountains. So I really like the fact that I can get to either one in a relatively short amount of time. How to start selling my landscape photos? So that's a great question. I think that whenever you're starting out, definitely having a website is of the utmost importance, and selling anything that you are trying to sell on your website is also very important. But the issue that you might have in the beginning is driving traffic to your website in order to see what you're trying to sell. So I would recommend when you're starting out to focus locally. So any kind of local art festivals or local art exhibits, focus on that at first, because I think that'll probably be the easiest way to get as many eyes on your artwork as possible in the beginning. Now that this is your full-time gig, how many days a week do you go out and shoot? Usually the answer is 0. I'm lucky to get out anywhere from maybe 1 time a week would be a good week, but most weeks it's 0. The majority of my time, I'd spend a lot of time on doing YouTube videos and editing those videos, and I also spend a lot of time just doing kind of the businessy side of things, emails and responding to things. And then usually if there's any time left over, that's when I have an opportunity to get out. But on average, it's 0 to 1 times a week, unfortunately. But I do hope in 2020 that is going to change. The next question is, who's the pup? That's in reference to the Instagram story I put out when I first mentioned the Q&A video. My dog Baxter was in that video, and so that's my dog Baxter. But my wife and I found him at my son's soccer game maybe 6 months ago. He was just out there running around, and we thought for sure that his owner was there somewhere, but long story short, everybody left the soccer field and Baxter was just sitting there with us. And we did everything we could for about a month to try and find his owners, but nobody ever came forward. So he is ours now. Thankfully, I love that guy. Which software do you use for post-processing? So I use Lightroom and Photoshop. I also have a Capture One. I got Capture One when I got my Fuji X-T3, which I use for all my video work for YouTube. So I got Capture One in case I wanted to process any kind of still RAW files from Fuji, because Fuji RAW files don't really work well with Lightroom. But anyway, Capture One is supposedly the best editing tool for Fuji files, but I really don't use it a whole lot. So it's mostly Lightroom and Photoshop. When will there be another viewer-submitted photo review video? So there will definitely be another one soon. That was seen to be a big hit. That was seen to be very popular, and I really enjoy doing that. So I don't know if I'll have another one this year, but if it's not towards the end of the year, it'll probably be towards the beginning of next year. Have you ever done a video on astrophotography? No, I have not, but it's been requested a couple times, and it's definitely on my to-do list. I just haven't gotten around to it just yet, but there will be one eventually. Is there any other genre of photography you do apart from landscapes? Nope, it's all landscapes. When I first got into photography, when I first started to try and make money with photography, I dabbled a little bit in portraits and also event photography and landscapes, but now it's all just landscapes. What would Sony have to come out with to make you upgrade cameras? I don't know what else they could come out with. I mean, the battery life on the Sony a7R III and the Sony a7R IV is substantially better than my Sony a7R II. And the weather sealing is much better than the R3 and the R4. I really don't know what else they could do. I don't really have any issue with my R2. I think the image quality is fantastic, and I'm really just used to carrying around 8 batteries, so that's not a big deal to me anymore either. I suppose maybe if Sony came out with some type of a bundle deal where they gave away a free lens with the new body, that might entice me to upgrade. But until something like that happens, I'll probably just run my R2 until the wheels fall off. How many portfolio photos are usually expected from a full-time pro per year? That's a good question, and I really don't, I can't speak for other people, but I know my goal is usually to get one portfolio quality photo from every trip or every shoot. A lot of times that doesn't happen. On my recent trip to Oregon, where I was out there for about 10 days, I came away with about 1,000 images. Of those 1,000 images, I think there was maybe 5 or 6 that I really like, and of those 5 or 6, there might have been one that I would consider a solid portfolio image. So one per trip is my goal, and it really just depends on how many trips I go on that specific year. How to shoot in poor weather if your camera isn't weather sealed. That's something that I deal with all the time with my camera, but what I usually do is if I'm not shooting at a particular time, if I'm just waiting for conditions to change, I just make sure I put a shower cap over my camera and lens, and then when I'm ready to shoot again, I just pull it off. And then at the end of my shoot, I make sure that I wipe down the camera very, very well, especially where the lens meets the actual camera body, and most importantly, take the battery out of the camera and just let it sit overnight and just let it completely dry without a battery in it. How often do you shoot panoramas, and what software do you use to stitch them? So I don't shoot panos very often. It's something that I've actually started to shoot a little bit more often. It's something I want to plan on doing a little bit more next year. But whenever I do shoot them, I just use Lightroom and Photoshop to stitch them together. Tips for bringing out the best in a scene when the conditions aren't perfect. Once again, another great question. It could be an entire video in itself. But I would say that the most common situation for me are those days where there's nothing in the clouds, so just a completely blue sky. Those are some of the most challenging conditions for me, and usually when I get in those situations, I try and change my mindset from thinking big, from thinking the big scene, and I try and focus on a more macro or a more detailed level. A lot of times that entails just taking your camera and pointing it at the ground. So just looking for those more intimate, more detailed shots where you can kind of completely remove the sky from your image. And then the last question is, what vlogging gear do you use? So I use the Fuji X-T3 with Fuji's 10 to, I believe it's 10 to 24 millimeter lens. That's what I shoot all of my video on. And anytime I'm doing any kind of actual vlogging, I use that setup as well. I have the whole Joby GorillaPod, set up, but I don't really use it as like a selfie stick or anything like that. Honestly, I just grab the actual lens barrel and just kind of extend it out, and that's what I use. And the lens has a optical image stabilization or image stabilization. It's stabilized a little bit, but that seems to work pretty well for me. So if I didn't get an opportunity to answer your question, I do apologize for that, but I want to say thank you to everyone who did submit a question. I really do appreciate it. It means a lot to me. And I really hope you enjoyed this week's video. And as always, if you have any questions, please leave those in the comments section below, and I guarantee I will get back in touch with you. And if you enjoyed this week's video, if you could give it that thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed already. And as always, I really do appreciate you watching this week's video, and I'll see you next week. Bye.